I had the perfect marriage, or at least I thought I did. My husband of 7 years, just out of the blue, told me that he wanted an open marriage. Am I not enough? What what am I doing that I shouldn't do? Tell me. I will make amends. I just want you for myself. How am I supposed to share my husband with other women? I begged this man. There was nothing I didn't say. I will quit my job. I'll have as much kids as he wanted. I'll give him all my time. But he said no. He said he just wanted to keep the spark alive. He said he wanted to be himself again. Like I have taken away part of him. And then I accepted the open marriage. And then I found a man that loved me. And now he wouldn't let me go. This was the story.
Success had never been Anita Jackson's problem. At 30 years old, she was one of Lagos's most sought-after event planners, known for creating luxury weddings, corporate galas, and celebrity celebrations that people talked about for months afterward. Her clients included politicians, business executives, socialites, and celebrities willing to pay enormous amounts of money for her creativity and attention to detail. Anita loved her work. She loved transforming empty spaces into breathtaking experiences. She loved watching months of planning come together perfectly. Most importantly, she loved the life she had built. By every outward measure, she was thriving. Her business was flourishing. Her reputation was growing. Her bank account was healthy. And she was married to a man she believed was the love of her life. Knox Lawrence, one of Lagos's youngest and most respected CEOs. At 34, Knox had transformed a struggling technology company into one of the fastest-growing firms in Nigeria. Business magazines featured him regularly. Young entrepreneurs admired him. Investors trusted him. Employees respected him. Together, Knox and Anita were considered one of Lagos's power couples. The kind of couple people envied, the kind of couple that looked perfect from the outside. They lived in a beautiful home in Lekki. They attended high-profile events together. They traveled frequently. They supported each other's careers. At least that was what everyone believed, including Anita. For 7 years, she had given everything to their relationship. She met Knox when she was 23. Back then, neither of them had reached the level of success they enjoyed now. They had built their lives side by side, celebrated victories together, overcome setbacks together, dreamed together, planned together, loved together. Or so she thought. The signs had been there. Looking back, Anita would eventually realize that. The late nights, the emotional distance, the increasing number of business trips, the way Knox seemed distracted whenever they spent time together, the conversations that became shorter, the intimacy that became less frequent. At the time, she blamed stress. After all, Knox carried enormous responsibility. Running a company wasn't easy, and her own schedule wasn't exactly relaxed either. She often spent weeks coordinating major events. Sometimes she barely slept. Sometimes Knox barely slept. Life became busy, demanding, exhausting. But she believed that was normal. Successful people made sacrifices. Successful marriages required understanding. So she ignored the little warning signs. Until the evening, everything changed. The day itself had been wonderful. Anita had just finalized a contract for a luxury destination wedding worth millions of naira. The client had personally praised her professionalism. She left the meeting feeling proud and excited. On her drive home through Lagos traffic, she found herself smiling. Life felt good, stable, predictable, safe. When she arrived home, she immediately noticed something unusual. Knox was already there. That alone wasn't strange. What caught her attention was his behavior. He seemed nervous, quiet, distracted. The moment she entered the living room, he looked up from his phone and forced a smile. A strange smile. The kind people wear when they're preparing to deliver bad news. Anita felt a sudden knot form in her stomach. "Everything okay?" she asked. Knox hesitated. "Yeah." The hesitation immediately worried her. "Are you sure?" He nodded. But his eyes told a different story. The rest of the evening felt awkward. Dinner was unusually quiet. Their conversations felt forced. Several times, Anita caught him staring into space. Each time she asked what was wrong, he dismissed her concerns. Eventually, after dinner, Knox asked if they could talk. The words instantly made Anita nervous. Nobody ever says we need to talk before sharing good news. She followed him into the sitting room, her heart already beating faster. Knox sat across from her. His expression was serious, almost rehearsed, as though he had practiced this conversation multiple times. "Anita," he began carefully. "We've been together for a long time." She smiled slightly. "That's usually how marriage works." He didn't smile back. The knot in her stomach tightened. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Knox leaned forward. "I love you." Immediately, Anita felt uneasy. Whenever people start difficult conversations with those words, disaster usually follows. She waited. Silent. Watching him, listening, trying to understand why her husband suddenly looked like a stranger. Then he said the words that would change her life forever. "I think we should open our marriage." For several seconds, Anita genuinely believed she had misunderstood him. Surely she had heard wrong. Surely her husband wasn't saying what she thought he was saying. "What?" Knox exhaled slowly. "I think we should consider an open marriage." The room suddenly felt smaller, hotter, harder to breathe inside. Anita stared at him, waiting for him to laugh, waiting for him to explain that this was some terrible joke. But he didn't. His expression remained serious, calm, almost businesslike. "You can't be serious." "I am." The words struck her harder than she expected. Anita felt her chest tighten, her ears ringing, her heart pounding. "What are you talking about?" Knox launched into an explanation that sounded suspiciously prepared. He claimed he still loved her. He insisted she was still the most important person in his life. He swore he wasn't unhappy. He repeated over and over that she had done nothing wrong. Yet somehow, despite all those reassurances, he wanted other women. He wanted variety, excitement, new experiences. The more he spoke, the more devastated Anita became, because none of it made sense. If she was enough, why wasn't she enough? If he loved her, why was he asking for this? If their marriage was healthy, why did he need outsiders involved? The contradictions made her dizzy. Is there someone else? The question came out quietly, painfully. Knox immediately shook his head. No. The answer arrived too quickly, too smoothly, as though he expected the question. Anita wasn't sure she believed him, even now, especially now. But she couldn't prove anything. So she focused on the only thing she knew. The man she trusted most was asking permission to sleep with other women. The realization felt humiliating, heartbreaking, cruel. No. The answer came instantly, firmly, absolutely. No. Knox looked disappointed, almost irritated. As Elise, think about it. I don't need to think about it. His jaw tightened. You're being emotional. The comment shocked her. Emotional? Of course she was emotional. Her husband had just shattered everything she believed about their marriage. The argument lasted for hours. Knox kept trying to persuade her, kept insisting it would strengthen their relationship, kept claiming it was only physical. Nothing emotional, nothing serious, nothing threatening. But every explanation felt like another wound. Every argument felt like another betrayal. Eventually, the conversation ended. Not because they reached an agreement, because Anita was emotionally exhausted. Over the following week, Knox continued pushing. Every day, every conversation, every opportunity, the pressure never stopped. And then came the moment Anita would never forget. The ultimatum. They were sitting in their bedroom when Knox finally said it. His voice was calm, cold, determined. If you can't accept this, maybe we should get divorced.
I couldn't fathom the fact that he wanted to leave me. He cared less about my feelings. No matter how I cried, no matter how I shouted, he just wanted an open marriage. And the ultimatum was that I either stay or I gave him a divorce so he could go and live his perfect life. I wasn't going to lose my husband over this. So, yeah, I made my decision. If this is how he was going to treat me, then he better be ready for what was coming for him.
The words hit harder than everything that came before. Divorce. The man she loved was willing to walk away, not because she had cheated, not because she had betrayed him, not because she had failed him, but because she wouldn't agree to share him. Anita barely slept that night, or the next, or the night after that. She cried when Knox wasn't looking. She questioned herself endlessly. She imagined life without him, and the thought terrified her. By the end of the week, fear won. Fear of losing her marriage, fear of starting over, fear of watching 7 years disappear. Finally, Anita gave Knox the answer he wanted. She agreed. The relief on his face was immediate, obvious, almost joyful. And somehow that hurt even more. Because while Knox celebrated, Anita felt something else entirely. Something deep inside her quietly cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to change everything. She didn't realize it then. But the marriage she had spent 7 years protecting would never truly recover from that moment, and neither would she. The first 3 months after opening the marriage were the longest months of Anita Jackson's life. She regretted her decision almost immediately. Not because she wanted to explore relationships with other men, not because she was curious, not because she believed Knox had been right. She regretted it because every day felt like a reminder that the man she loved had chosen other women over protecting their marriage. At first, Anita refused to participate. The arrangement had been Knox's idea, not hers. If she was being honest, the thought of seeing another man felt wrong, unnatural. She had spent 7 years loving one person, building her life around one person, imagining her future with one person. Even after Knox shattered her heart, she couldn't simply switch off her feelings. Meanwhile, Knox seemed to embrace his new lifestyle immediately. He was constantly busy, constantly unavailable, constantly smiling. Several nights a week he returned home late. Other times he didn't return until the early hours of the morning. Whenever Anita asked where he had been, Knox simply reminded her of the agreement. The agreement she never wanted and the agreement he had forced upon her. Each conversation felt like another small wound. Each absence felt like another rejection. She tried focusing on work. Fortunately, work had never disappointed her. Her event planning company continued growing. Luxury clients filled her calendar months in advance. She coordinated destination weddings, corporate launches, celebrity birthdays, charity galas. Her reputation throughout Lagos continued expanding. From the outside, Anita looked successful, confident, accomplished. But behind closed doors, she was struggling. The loneliness was becoming unbearable. Some nights she sat alone in their massive Lekki home, wondering what was wrong with her. What exactly had she failed to give her husband? Why wasn't she enough? The questions never stopped. Eventually, she confided in the people she trusted most. Her younger sister, Amara, and her best friend, Tessa. Neither woman reacted the way Anita expected. Instead of sympathizing with Knox's perspective, they were furious. Absolutely furious. "Let me understand this," Amara said one evening. "Your husband demanded permission to date other women, threatened divorce if you refused, and now you're sitting here crying while he's enjoying himself." Anita stared into her cup of tea. "I still love him." Tessa shook her head. "And who is loving you?" The question hit harder than Anita expected, because she didn't have an answer. For months, both women encouraged her to stop punishing herself, to stop hiding, to stop acting like the arrangement only applied to Knox. But Anita resisted. The idea made her uncomfortable. What if nobody wanted her? What if she embarrassed herself? What if Knox was right? Then one Saturday afternoon, everything changed. Tessa arrived at Anita's apartment carrying her laptop. Without warning, she sat down beside her, opened several dating apps, and created profiles for her. Anita protested the entire time, until the messages started arriving. Then she stopped protesting, because the response was overwhelming, completely overwhelming. Hundreds of likes, dozens of messages, invitation after invitation, compliment after compliment. For the first time in months, Anita felt something she hadn't experienced in a very long time. Validation. Not because strangers found her attractive, but because the attention challenged the narrative she had created inside her head. Maybe she wasn't undesirable. Maybe she wasn't inadequate. Maybe Knox's choices weren't actually about her at all. When she finally mentioned the dating profiles to Knox, his reaction surprised her. He looked genuinely shocked. "That many men messaged you?" Anita shrugged. "Apparently." For several seconds, Knox remained unusually quiet. Then he forced a smile. "Good for you." At the time, Anita didn't think much about his reaction. Later, she would remember it differently. Much differently. Her first few dates were pleasant enough. Some were awkward, some were boring. A few were memorable. Most never progressed beyond dinner. But each experience slowly rebuilt her confidence. The woman who had spent months feeling rejected was beginning to see herself differently. Then she met Kelvin Richards, and everything changed. Their first interaction happened online. Unlike many of the other men messaging her, Kelvin didn't begin with compliments about her appearance. He didn't try to impress her. He didn't flirt aggressively. Instead, he asked about her work. Specifically, an event she had recently organized, a charity fundraiser that had received media attention. The question caught her off guard. Most people focused on her photos. Kelvin focused on her accomplishments. Their conversation lasted 3 hours. 3 hours that felt like 30 minutes. By the time they stopped messaging, Anita found herself smiling, genuinely smiling, for the first time in a long while. A week later, they met in person. Kelvin was even more impressive than she expected. 38 years old, successful, well-spoken, confident, the owner of several thriving businesses across Lagos, yet surprisingly humble. There was no arrogance, no need to dominate conversations, no desperate attempts to prove himself. Instead, he listened, actually listened. When Anita talked about work stress, Kelvin paid attention. When she shared stories about difficult clients, he laughed. When she discussed her dreams, he asked thoughtful questions. The date ended far too quickly. As Anita drove home, she realized something strange. She hadn't thought about Knox the entire evening. That realization both excited and frightened her. Over the following weeks, Kelvin became a regular part of her life. Their relationship developed gradually, naturally, comfortably. Unlike her marriage, where difficult conversations often ended in arguments, conversations with Kelvin felt easy, safe, effortless. Most importantly, Kelvin noticed things. Little things. The details Knox no longer seemed to see. He remembered her favorite coffee order. He remembered important meetings. He remembered dates she mentioned casually weeks earlier. He remembered everything. One morning, before a major event presentation, Anita received a text message. "Good luck today. You're going to be amazing." The message came from Kelvin, not Knox. Later that afternoon, after securing the contract, another message arrived. "I knew you'd get it." Again, Kelvin, not Knox. The contrast became impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, Knox seemed increasingly focused on his own activities. Their marriage existed, but barely. They shared a home, shared responsibilities, shared history. Yet emotionally, they felt farther apart than ever. The saddest part was that Knox didn't seem to notice. Or perhaps he didn't care. Either possibility hurt. Months passed, and Kelvin continued showing up consistently, not with grand gestures, not with expensive gifts, but with attention, respect, consideration. Things Anita hadn't realized she was missing. One evening, after a particularly exhausting week, Kelvin invited her to dinner. Halfway through the meal, he looked at her and smiled. "What?" Anita asked. "Nothing." "Then why are you staring at me?" Kelvin laughed softly. "Because you don't see yourself the way everyone else does." Anita frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means you're remarkable." The simplicity of the statement stunned her. No hidden agenda, no exaggeration, just sincerity. And for reasons she couldn't fully explain, tears suddenly filled her eyes. Kelvin immediately grew concerned. "Did I say something wrong?" She shook her head. "No." The truth was much harder to admit, because for years she had waited for Knox to make her feel that way. Seen. Valued. Appreciated. Instead, a man she had known for only a few months was accomplishing it effortlessly. That realization terrified her, because she was beginning to look forward to Kelvin's calls, Kelvin's messages, Kelvin's company, more than she looked forward to spending time with her own husband. And deep down, Anita knew she was standing at the edge of something dangerous. Not because Kelvin was a bad man, but because he was a good one. The kind of man who reminded her what genuine care looked like. The kind of man who made her question everything she thought she knew about love. The kind of man who was slowly occupying a space in her heart that once belonged entirely to Knox Lawrence. And for the first time since the open marriage began, Anita found herself wondering whether her marriage had survived the ultimatum at all, or whether it had quietly ended the moment she said yes. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It happened gradually, so gradually that Anita Jackson barely noticed it herself at first. For months, she had been operating in survival mode, simply trying to make it through each day without allowing the heartbreak of her marriage to completely consume her. She had spent countless nights questioning herself, wondering what she lacked, wondering why the man she loved had been willing to risk everything they built together for the opportunity to be with other women. At one point, she genuinely believed something was wrong with her. That belief had followed her everywhere. It followed her into business meetings. It followed her into social gatherings. It followed her home at night. It even followed her when she looked into the mirror. But somewhere along the way, something began to change. The confidence she thought she had lost forever slowly started returning. The woman who once apologized for taking up space was beginning to stand a little taller. The woman who once doubted her beauty was beginning to see herself through different eyes. The woman who once believed her happiness depended entirely on Knox Lawrence was beginning to discover that she could create happiness for herself. Her business continued thriving. In fact, it was doing better than ever. As one of Lagos's most respected event planners, Anita's calendar was booked months in advance, and every successful event seemed to bring new opportunities, new clients, and even greater recognition within elite social and corporate circles. People admired her creativity. People respected her professionalism. People trusted her judgment. For years, she had built an impressive career. The difference now was that she was finally allowing herself to enjoy it. Her laughter returned. Her energy returned. Her enthusiasm returned. Even her employees noticed the difference. Several members of her team commented on how much happier she seemed lately, how much lighter she appeared, how much more confident she sounded. And for the first time in a very long time, Anita actually believed them. A large part of that change came from Kelvin Richards. His presence in her life had become far more significant than she originally intended. What started as a casual connection had gradually evolved into something deeper. Not because either of them planned it. Not because either of them forced it. But because genuine emotional connections often develop naturally when two people consistently show up for one another. Kelvin remained everything Knox had stopped being. Attentive, present, supportive, reliable. Whenever Anita achieved something important, Kelvin celebrated her success. Whenever she faced challenges, Kelvin encouraged her. Whenever she doubted herself, Kelvin reminded her of her strengths. The most surprising part was how effortless it all felt. There were no games, no emotional confusion, no moments where she found herself wondering whether she mattered. Kelvin made his feelings clear through his actions. And over time, those actions began healing wounds Anita didn't even realize she was carrying. Meanwhile, Knox's reality was becoming increasingly different from the one he imagined when he first demanded the open marriage. At the beginning, everything had seemed exciting. New experiences, new attention, new possibilities. For a while, he genuinely believed he had discovered the perfect arrangement. He could keep the stability of his marriage while simultaneously enjoying the freedom to pursue other relationships. At least that had been the fantasy. Reality proved much more complicated. The excitement didn't last forever. The attention became inconsistent. Many of the women Knox pursued were uninterested in casual arrangements. Others lost interest after a short period. Some wanted commitment. Some wanted emotional investment. Others simply weren't interested in becoming part of a complicated situation involving a married man. Gradually, Knox found himself spending more evenings alone, more weekends alone, more time scrolling through messages that never turned into anything meaningful. The freedom he once fought so hard to obtain was no longer delivering the satisfaction he expected. But what troubled him most wasn't his own experience. It was Anita's. Because while his excitement was fading, hers seemed to be growing. At first, Knox tried ignoring it. He convinced himself that it didn't matter. After all, this arrangement applied to both of them. He was the one who created the rules. He was the one who insisted this lifestyle would strengthen their marriage. He had no reason to complain. At least that's what logic told him. Emotion told a different story. The first time he noticed the change was during a dinner party hosted by mutual friends in Ikoyi. Anita spent most of the evening smiling, laughing, engaging in conversations, radiating confidence. Several people complimented her work. Others complimented her appearance. The attention she received was impossible to miss. And for reasons Knox couldn't fully explain, watching it made him uncomfortable. Very uncomfortable. Because for the first time, he began seeing Anita the way other people saw her. Not as the wife who would always be there. Not as the familiar presence waiting at home, but as a remarkable woman other men would gladly pursue. That realization lingered long after the event ended. Then came Kelvin. Or more accurately, Knox's growing awareness of Kelvin. At first, Kelvin was simply another name. Another person Anita occasionally mentioned. Nothing more. But over time, Knox started noticing patterns. Anita smiled whenever Kelvin called. She seemed genuinely excited whenever they had plans. She often spoke about him with warmth and admiration. And perhaps most concerning of all, she appeared relaxed around him, comfortable, happy. The word haunted Knox. Happy. Because somewhere along the way, Anita had stopped looking that way around him. The realization planted a seed of insecurity he couldn't ignore. Suddenly, Knox started paying closer attention. He noticed how often Anita checked her phone. He noticed how frequently she seemed distracted. He noticed how often she was unavailable because she already had plans. Plans that didn't involve him. Plans involving Kelvin. For the first time since proposing the open marriage, Knox experienced something he never anticipated. Jealousy. Not mild jealousy, not occasional jealousy. Real jealousy. The kind that keeps people awake at night. The kind that creates anxiety. The kind that forces uncomfortable questions to the surface. Questions Knox didn't want to answer. Questions like, what if Anita no longer loved him? What if she found someone better? What if Kelvin offered her everything he had failed to provide? The answers terrified him. And so Knox did what many people do when faced with consequences they never expected. He tried to reverse course. Almost overnight, he became the attentive husband Anita had wanted for years. He started suggesting date nights. He planned romantic dinners. He proposed weekend getaways. He talked about taking vacations together. He wanted quality time, connection, intimacy. Everything Anita had spent years hoping for. The irony wasn't lost on her, not even slightly. This was the same man who once argued that one woman could never satisfy him. The same man who insisted exclusivity was unrealistic. The same man who threatened divorce when she refused his demands. Now suddenly he wanted closeness, commitment, attention. Monogamous behavior without actually calling it monogamy. Anita found the transformation both fascinating and frustrating, because it wasn't that Knox had become incapable of being the husband she needed. Clearly, he was capable. The painful truth was that he only became that husband after realizing someone else appreciated her value. One evening, Knox suggested a weekend trip, a luxury resort, just the two of them. Under different circumstances, Anita might have been excited. Years earlier, she would have canceled any commitment to spend time with him. But things were different now. She already had plans with Kelvin. When she politely declined, disappointment flashed across Knox's face. Then irritation, then anger. The reaction surprised her. "You spend more time with him than you do with me," Knox said. The statement hung heavily between them. Anita stared at him, almost speechless, because hearing those words from the man who created this situation felt surreal. "You wanted this," she reminded him quietly. Knox immediately looked away, and for the first time Anita saw something she had never seen before. Regret, real regret. Not regret because he hurt her. Not regret because he damaged their marriage. Regret because the arrangement was no longer benefiting him the way he expected. The realization changed something inside her, because she finally understood a painful truth. Knox never imagined she would thrive without him. He never imagined she would become happier, stronger, more confident, more fulfilled. He expected her to remain exactly where he left her while he explored other options. Instead, she had grown, and that growth frightened him. As Knox's jealousy intensified, new sides of his personality began emerging. Controlling tendencies, possessiveness, suspicion, behavior Anita had never witnessed during the earlier years of their marriage. The more she pulled away emotionally, the harder he tried to pull her back. The more independent she became, the more desperate he seemed. And deep down, Anita began realizing something she wasn't yet ready to admit aloud. The marriage wasn't healing, it was unraveling. Slowly, quietly, irreversibly. Because sometimes regret arrives after the damage is already done. And sometimes by the time someone realizes what they have lost, the person they are fighting for has already started moving on. By the beginning of the second year of their open marriage, Anita Jackson no longer recognized the life she was living. Not because her career had changed, not because Lagos had changed, not because her goals had changed, but because the man she once believed she would spend the rest of her life with had become almost unrecognizable. And perhaps more surprisingly, so had she. There was a time when Anita could not imagine a future without Knox Lawrence. A time when his approval mattered more than her own happiness. A time when she would have sacrificed almost anything to keep their marriage intact. That woman no longer existed. The transformation had not happened through anger. It had not happened through revenge. It had not happened because she deliberately set out to replace her husband. It happened because pain had forced her to grow. And growth often changes people in ways they never expect. Unfortunately, Knox was only beginning to understand that. His jealousy, which had started as occasional frustration, was becoming impossible to ignore. At first, it showed itself in small ways: passive-aggressive comments, subtle complaints, questions disguised as casual conversation. But as the months passed, those small moments became more frequent, more intense, more difficult to overlook. Whenever Anita mentioned Kelvin's name, Knox's mood immediately changed. Whenever she had plans with Kelvin, Knox suddenly found reasons to be unhappy. Whenever she returned home smiling after spending time with him, Knox seemed irritated for the rest of the evening. The irony would have been amusing if it wasn't so exhausting. This was the same man who had spent months insisting that emotional attachment wasn't important. The same man who had repeatedly argued that adults should be free to pursue multiple relationships. The same man who claimed exclusivity was outdated. Now, suddenly, he seemed deeply bothered by the very arrangement he had demanded. One evening, Anita returned home after attending a charity gala at a luxury hotel in Victoria Island. The event had been a tremendous success. Several high-profile guests had attended. Potential clients had approached her throughout the evening, and Kelvin had accompanied her as her guest. The entire evening had been enjoyable, professional, relaxing, exactly what she needed after an exhausting week. The moment she entered the house, however, she sensed trouble. Knox was sitting alone in the living room. The television was on, but he wasn't watching it. His attention immediately shifted toward her. "You're late." The tone of his voice instantly annoyed her. Not because of what he said, because of how he said it. As though she needed permission. As though she needed approval. As though she had broken some rule. Anita calmly placed her purse on the table. The event ended later than expected. Knox leaned back. "With Kelvin, I assume?" There it was. The real issue. Not the time, not the event. Kelvin, always Kelvin. Anita sighed. Yes, Kelvin was there. The silence that followed was uncomfortable. Heavy. Predictable. Finally, Knox spoke. "You spend a lot of time with him." Anita looked directly at him. "You spent a lot of time talking about him." The response clearly irritated him. His expression hardened immediately. "What exactly is that supposed to mean?" "It means you're obsessed." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The tension between them felt suffocating. Because deep down, both of them knew she was right. Knox thought about Kelvin constantly, much more than Anita ever discussed him, and everyone knew why. Fear. Simple, undeniable fear. For the first time since proposing the open marriage, Knox was genuinely afraid. Afraid of losing control. Afraid of losing influence. Afraid of losing Anita. The realization seemed to affect him more with each passing week. Suddenly, he wanted conversations. Suddenly, he wanted emotional connection. Suddenly, he wanted everything he had ignored for years. But Anita couldn't stop asking herself the same painful question. Why now? Why did it take another man appreciating her for Knox to finally see her value? Why did it take the possibility of losing her for him to start treating her like she mattered? The questions haunted her, because no answer felt good enough. Several weeks later, Knox attempted something different. Instead of arguing, he began trying to recreate the relationship they once had. He planned romantic dinners. He bought flowers. He suggested vacations. He even surprised her by arranging reservations at a luxury resort they had always talked about visiting. Years earlier, those gestures would have made Anita incredibly happy. Years earlier, she would have been thrilled. But now, they felt strangely hollow. Not because the effort wasn't genuine, but because the timing was. Every gesture felt less like love and more like panic. Less like appreciation and more like damage control. And Anita couldn't ignore that distinction. One night, after returning from another successful event, she sat alone on the balcony overlooking the city. The lights of Lagos stretched endlessly in the distance. Traffic moved through the streets below. The warm evening breeze brushed against her skin. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to be completely honest. The truth arrived quietly, without drama, without resistance, without confusion. She no longer loved Knox, at least not in the way a wife should love her husband. She cared about him. She wanted him to be happy. She appreciated the years they had shared together. But the deep emotional connection that once existed between them was gone, completely gone. And perhaps the most shocking part was realizing when it had disappeared. Not recently. Not because of Kelvin. Not because of their arguments. It had died 2 years earlier. The night Knox gave her the ultimatum. The night he told her she could either share him or lose him. That was the moment something fundamental broke. She simply hadn't been ready to acknowledge it. Now she was. And once she accepted that truth, everything else became clearer. The following month, Anita met Kelvin for dinner. As they sat overlooking the water, Kelvin noticed her unusual silence. "You seem distracted." She smiled sadly. "I've been thinking." "About?" "My marriage." Kelvin remained quiet, waiting, listening, something he always did exceptionally well. Anita stared out toward the water. I don't think it's a marriage anymore. The words felt strange leaving her mouth, yet somehow they also felt liberating. Because they were true. For a long time, she had been holding on to a version of Knox that no longer existed. Holding on to memories. Holding on to hope. Holding on to a relationship that had already ended emotionally. And she was tired. Tired of pretending. Tired of avoiding reality. Tired of carrying responsibilities that no longer belonged to her alone. Several days later, Anita made an appointment with a lawyer. Even then, she struggled with the decision. Not because she doubted it, because she understood its finality. Divorce wasn't simply paperwork. It was the official ending of a chapter she once believed would last forever. The process moved surprisingly quickly. When Knox received the documents, he was devastated. Truly devastated. For the first time since Anita met him, she saw genuine heartbreak in his eyes. Not frustration, not jealousy, heartbreak. He called repeatedly, texted repeatedly, asked for meetings, asked for second chances, asked for opportunities to fix things. But Anita had already reached a place emotionally that Knox had not. Acceptance. The hardest part wasn't filing for divorce. The hardest part was realizing there was nothing left to save. One evening, they sat together in the house they once dreamed of filling with decades of memories. Neither spoke for several minutes. Finally, Knox broke the silence. Is this because of Kelvin? The question carried enormous pain. Anita looked at him carefully, then slowly shook her head. No. The answer surprised him, and it was the truth. Kelvin had not destroyed their marriage. Kelvin had simply shown her what she was missing. The damage had happened long before that. The moment Knox forced her into a choice she never wanted. The moment he prioritized his desires over their relationship. The moment he stopped protecting what they had built together. As tears filled Knox's eyes, Anita felt sadness, but not regret. Because deep down, they both knew the truth. He hadn't lost Anita to another man. He had lost her the day he demanded a marriage she never wanted. And now, for the first time in years, Anita was finally choosing herself. The silence surprised her most. Not the silence inside her apartment. Not the silence after the divorce papers were finalized. Not even the silence that followed the end of a 7-year relationship. It was the silence inside her heart. For so long, Anita Jackson had lived with emotional noise. Questions, doubts, fear, heartbreak, disappointment. The constant struggle of trying to save something that no longer wanted to be saved. For years, she had carried the weight of her marriage on her shoulders, convincing herself that if she worked harder, loved harder, sacrificed more, everything would somehow return to normal. It never did. And now, standing in the living room of her new apartment overlooking part of Victoria Island, Anita experienced something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Peace. Real peace. The kind that doesn't come from pretending. The kind that doesn't depend on someone else's approval. The kind that arrives when a difficult chapter finally ends. The divorce had been finalized 3 months earlier. Contrary to what many people expected, there had been no dramatic public battle, no ugly social media accusations, no endless courtroom fights, just two people acknowledging a painful truth. Their marriage had run its course. For Knox Lawrence, the adjustment was difficult. For Anita, it felt like learning how to breathe again. She focused on rebuilding her life. Her event planning business continued growing rapidly. Several major corporations signed long-term contracts with her company. Luxury weddings filled her calendar. Celebrity clients recommended her services. Within months, she was earning more money than she ever had before. Professionally, she was thriving. Emotionally, she was healing. And through every stage of that healing process, Kelvin Richards remained exactly who he had always been. Consistent, patient, reliable. Unlike the uncertainty she had experienced throughout the final years of her marriage, Kelvin's presence felt steady. There were no emotional games, no manipulation, no moments that left her questioning where she stood. He showed up when he said he would. He called when he promised. He listened when she spoke. He remembered things that mattered to her. The simplicity of it all felt extraordinary. One evening, after a particularly successful event, Anita arrived home exhausted. She had spent nearly 14 hours coordinating a luxury wedding in Lekki. Everything had gone perfectly. The clients were thrilled, the guests were impressed, but she was completely drained. When she entered her apartment, she discovered a food package waiting for her. Attached was a simple note. "Thought you'd be tired today. Eat something and get some rest." Kelvin and Anita smiled. Not because of the food, because of the thoughtfulness. The gesture itself wasn't expensive. It wasn't grand. It wasn't dramatic. But it reminded her of something important. Love often reveals itself through small actions, through consistency, through consideration, through showing someone they matter. For years, Anita had convinced herself that extraordinary love required extraordinary sacrifices. Kelvin taught her something different. Healthy love felt peaceful, not exhausting. Months passed. Their relationship continued growing stronger. Neither of them rushed anything. Neither of them pressured the other. Both understood the importance of allowing wounds to heal properly. For the first time in her adult life, Anita wasn't building a relationship out of fear. She wasn't afraid of abandonment. She wasn't afraid of losing herself. She wasn't afraid of being alone. She simply enjoyed being with Kelvin. And that made all the difference. Meanwhile, Knox remained largely absent from her life. Occasionally, mutual friends mentioned him. Occasionally, she heard updates about his company. Occasionally, she learned that he was still struggling to move forward. But Anita no longer spent her days thinking about him. Not because she hated him, not because she wished him harm, but because she had finally accepted the truth. Some chapters are meant to end, and constantly rereading them prevents you from enjoying the next part of your story. One Saturday afternoon, nearly a year after the divorce, Kelvin invited Anita to spend the day with him. The plan seemed simple enough. Lunch, a walk, a quiet afternoon together. Nothing unusual, nothing suspicious. At least that's what Anita believed. The day began beautifully. The Lagos weather was unusually pleasant. The sky was bright, the atmosphere relaxed. Everything felt perfect. After lunch, Kelvin suggested they visit a private garden venue overlooking the water. Anita agreed without hesitation. As they walked through the beautifully landscaped grounds, she noticed something unusual. Several familiar faces, friends, family members, people she loved. Confused, she turned toward Kelvin. Before she could ask any questions, he smiled, then slowly dropped to one knee. The world seemed to stop. For a moment, Anita simply stared, speechless, overwhelmed, emotional. Kelvin looked up at her with the same warmth that had first attracted her to him. The same kindness, the same sincerity, the same steady love that had helped rebuild parts of her heart she thought were damaged forever. "Anita," he began, "you changed my life in ways you'll probably never fully understand." Tears immediately filled her eyes. Around them, friends and family watched quietly, waiting, smiling, listening. "You've shown me what partnership looks like. You've shown me strength. You've shown me kindness. And every single day I find another reason to be grateful that you walked into my life." By now, Anita was crying openly. Happy tears, the kind she once feared she would never experience again. Kelvin opened a small box. Inside sat a beautiful ring, simple, elegant, perfect. "I don't want to imagine a future without you in it." He smiled. "Will you marry me?" The answer came instantly, without hesitation, without fear, without uncertainty. "Yes." The crowd erupted into applause. Cheers filled the air. Family members rushed forward. Friends celebrated. And for the first time in many years, Anita felt completely certain about her future. Several months later, beneath the warm Lagos sunshine, they exchanged vows surrounded by everyone who mattered most. There were no doubts, no painful memories, no lingering questions. Only happiness, only gratitude, only love. As Anita stood beside Kelvin and listened to him promise his future to her, she realized something powerful. She was no longer the woman who begged someone to stay. She was no longer the woman who questioned her worth. She was no longer the woman who accepted less than she deserved. She had become someone stronger, someone wiser, someone who finally understood her own value. And as she looked into Kelvin's eyes, she knew she had made the right decision. Not because Kelvin was perfect, but because his love never required her to become less in order to keep him. Somewhere else in Lagos, Knox Lawrence continued living with the consequences of a choice he once believed would improve his life. Perhaps he finally understood what he had lost. Perhaps he spent quiet moments reflecting on the marriage he destroyed. Perhaps he wished he could go back and choose differently. But life rarely offers second chances for lessons that arrive too late. While Knox was left with regret, Anita was rewarded with something far more valuable. A love built on respect, a love built on trust, a love built on genuine appreciation. The kind of love she had deserved all along. And for the first time in years, her heart was finally home.
How do you claim to love someone and then just tell them that you want an open marriage? It doesn't work like that. And when she starts thinking that, okay, she was in this thing called marriage and she wasn't getting everything she wanted. When she wanted to leave, all of a sudden, you want to love her right. Because someone else feels like she's a treasure that needs to be protected and needs to be wanted and needs to be taken care of. And all of a sudden, you want your wife back. You don't eat your cake and have it. You can opt for something and at the end you want to like end it because you feel like it is not serving you the way you wanted it to. And sometimes that's how we take life. We think that because in our head we are worth something. So whatever it is we desire should be given to us. Why you forget that the other person too deserves everything he or she thinks he deserves. Knox felt like Anita couldn't live without him. He felt like no man would want Anita because he already had her. He lost gold while trying to look for whatever he was looking for in stones, and he was never getting her back. The moral of this story is telling us that when you have someone, you treasure the person because sometimes once you lose that particular person, the one that got away, you will keep searching and searching, but you could never find them again. Because sometimes you only get to know once. And when you fumble it, it's over. My flowers, please, I would love to know your thoughts about the story in the comment section. Catch you next time. Bye.